Penn State has a lot of needs. They also got to get somebody that no one's expecting them to get. This is how Penn State can win the transfer portal.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And before we get into this episode, I have to share a brief disclaimer. This show was recorded before Ethan Grunkemeyer and Tony Rojas, Koby Howard, and others announced their decisions, but this episode still gives you a full perspective of what Penn State needs to do to win the transfer portal. That is right. We are talking Penn State football in this Locked On crossover. And thank you so much for making this episode your first listen and watch for today. My name is Seyko. I'm the host of Locked On Nittany Lions. And if we're going to talk transfer portal here, let's get the expert himself, Brian Smith, host of The Portal. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcasting network out there. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Before tip-off, check the FanDuel app and see what's dropping during NBA Happy Hour every Friday from 6 to 7:30 Eastern. Well, Brian, today, the transfer portal officially opens. And, of course, Happy New Year to each and every one of you if you haven't been wished so already. Players are already on the move. The transfer portal officially opens today. We're going to discuss Penn State's biggest needs, biggest wants. They want a superstar. Can they pull off an unexpected move and land a said superstar player? But this is how Penn State can win the transfer portal. That's where we got to begin. Brian, they got a long list. I am predicting, I am anticipating that we see somewhere north of potentially 30 players join Penn State. That's the situation that they're in. And this doesn't necessarily even have to do with Matt Campbell taking over for James Franklin. It also has to do with the fact that Penn State is just losing a ton of players to the NFL draft, the natural attrition of college football. So how Penn State can win the portal, retain your key players that are already at Penn State, build the depth chart out and go get those other key players from Iowa State. And again, get that superstar player that nobody's expecting Matt Campbell to land.
If they can just get one on each side of the ball, I think they'd be in a pretty good spot. And if you're going to take over 30 players with the kind of money that Penn State has, I don't think that's a very difficult bar to jump over. And I'm just going to say it. I called Matt Campbell a long time ago. I'm like, this is the guy they should go after. They finally figured that out. But like he should be pretty. I've been around him a little bit, covering him. That should be pretty easy sell. He's a good guy. Penn State's not a difficult logo to push on a recruit or a guy from the portal. I bet you they get 3 or 4 really good players. And the key we'll get into, I think they'll get some guys that have more than 1 year of eligibility as well.
Yeah, you also have to think beyond just 1 year, plug and play, because that's how you lose, by going and getting a ton of mercenaries. Because as much as I would like to say Penn State and Matt Campbell can contend for a national title in year 1, that's not realistic. You can contend, if all things go well, potentially for a college football playoff berth. Kurt Cignetti in Indiana did that in year 1. And then look, they made that leap in year 2. And here we are where we are, right? But in order to get to that point, you have to be realistic and win in year 1. So the conversation, Brian, I want to interject this because you can potentially lose out if you don't do this right. I am anticipating this is more of a guess, more of a hunch than anything else. Rocco Becht is going to be the quarterback for Penn State in 2026. What that means for Ethan Grunkemeyer, hey, that's to be determined. I would like for him to stick around and then be the quarterback of the future. But when you prove that you can start in the Big Ten in 7 games, you're going to want to go somewhere else, or people are going to want you to play for them and be their starting quarterback. Here's how Penn State, you don't want to be in a situation where, 1, you alienate Ethan Grunkemeyer, and then 2, it's not a slam dunk for Rocco Becht. You don't want to be in a situation where you happen to miss out on both because other teams are going to pursue Becht. So for Penn State, you got to make sure that you have one of these quarterbacks locked up.
It would be great to get both to stick around. I don't know how that will work if that does come to fruition. Rocco's a great guy, but I'm sure Ethan wants to play, and that's fair. So if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. They got to cross that bridge and accept it if it doesn't work out. But I'm sure they've spoken with Ethan about that. And those guys, if they could keep both, would be a really good way to push on some of the tight ends, running backs, and receivers are going to go after, hey, we've got at least one guy here that we know is proven. We got another one's played a little bit. Come join us. We've got a chance to be really good long term. So to me, keeping Grunkemeyer in some ways is more important than Rocco because he's got multiple years of eligibility left. Again, I'm not saying that's likely. I'm not saying I know anything about it. I don't know Grunkemeyer. Never been around him. But I would imagine that it's going to behoove Penn State to find a way to keep him because you need to get guys long term. That receiver room has been cleared out pretty good. I would imagine that they should be able to go get 2 or 3 pretty good receivers, but having multiple quarterbacks is the way you do that.
Wide receiver, defensive line, we have that conversation over and over again, which we'll get to in the upcoming segment. But figuring out the quarterback spot, you can't go to defensive line or wide receiver until you have quarterback figured out. And the ideal setup, this is the perfect. I've said that Matt Campbell would be a wizard if he can pull this off because the amount of convincing and program selling that you would have to do to say, hey, Rocco Becht's going to be our starter for one season. Ethan, we want you around, but we want you to take a back seat in 2026 after you prove what you proved. That's a very difficult conversation to have. Maybe you open it up and it's somewhat of a quarterback competition, but also if you're Rocco Becht, why would you be on the fence, go walk into a situation where you're not going to be the starter your final year of college? That's going to jeopardize any future you have in the NFL potentially. So if Matt Campbell can get Rocco Becht as a starter, Ethan Grunkemeyer as the backup, you arguably have the best quarterback room in the entire country. But I think that's extremely unlikely. What I do expect is that Penn State gets Becht, but they also land Alex Manske, who would be willing to sit for another year and then be the future starter. He is the backup at Iowa State this past season as a true freshman. He'd be a second-year quarterback as a redshirt freshman. You sit behind Rocco Becht again, and then he's the starter with 3 years of eligibility. So again, Penn State can't afford to miss both of these options. They can't afford to alienate Grunkemeyer. They also can't afford to lose out to Becht and potentially Manske going somewhere else. You have to get one setup either way.
Yeah, I would agree. You can take that offensively, defensively, etc. When they're done with this and like 30 plus players are going to come in, your goal is to not only have explosive players and have Becht, etc. You don't want to have holes anywhere. That's kind of what you're alluding to. You got to have some combinations that work. And that way you can have normal defense, you get a normal special teams, normal offense. I don't know how you try to figure like that number to me. Like if you say, oh, we're going to get 15 guys, it's a lot, but you can get it done 30 plus and really having to hit it. Like the people in the back office for Penn State this year to make that work, that's crazy to me, but that's their job. I'm sure it's fun in a way, but it's got to be nerve wracking because I was just at the Under Armour practices for the All-American game, talking to some people that are in the NIL space, what's going on. There are a lot of guys that are dealing behind closed doors that are not in the portal, but they're in the portal, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like it's straight up guys being bought off rosters, 100%. So that would drive me nuts both directions because I'm talking about 7-figure deals for guys. So I can only imagine what Penn State's people are going through.
What a world we are in with college football. Brian, and we'll carry this over into segment 2 with the biggest needs and the biggest wants that Penn State has. Okay. How many Iowa State players are coming over? Is that going to be all 30? Is that going to, I am anticipating 15 to 20 potentially because some of those guys can start other places. For example, Jeremiah Cooper and Jontez Williams are ranked top 10 overall in the entire country when it comes to the On3 rankings. So those guys are going to be sought after by more than just Penn State. So don't think that there's just an immediate pipeline. And I've gone on the record multiple times now to say that Penn State should want Iowa State to basically all follow Matt Campbell over because they are good players, but you also don't have to force them into roles that, I guess for a lack of a better term, were outside of their comfort zone. You were playing some people that just, hey, you don't need player A to be a 3-down player anymore. You can have the flexibility. It's about building the depth. And that's what I've been trying to get at is that Matt Campbell never had that at Iowa State. But now if you bring over those players, you create some competition, you create some depth, guys who are playing basically 70, 75 snaps a game. Now you can dial it back for their sake, just for health, longevity, but also because they probably should have been playing 50 or 45 or 50 snaps a game and not necessarily 60, 65 or 70.
Yeah, I'm curious about like the corners at Iowa State in particular. Like,
they're good. They're really
they're a good football player. You can go look up their PFF numbers, film, whatever you want. And they know the system. And I'm just going to use them as an example. The defense that they're going to run, I'm sure it's going to be some kind of hybrid based on Lynn coming over from the Southern Cal Trojans. But having them is going to help. You want as many of the defensive guys, I'm sure, in particular, to run that scheme and help Lynn out both ways. And then it's plug and play. They might surprise some people if they can do that. That's one of the reasons you want those guys coming in. I used this last time we talked. Indiana did that with the guys they brought up from James Madison. They were transfers, different uniform, but it's the same stuff they were running.
Yeah.
Same verbiage. That matters a lot. If Penn State, let's just cut the number flat, 20 guys, 10 on each side come over, even if not all of them are starters. And then you just, a few other guys from other schools just randomly, kid from Florida, kid from Texas Tech, whatever.
Yep.
Penn State could be a top 5 team in the Big Ten. But the key, those Iowa State kids, absolutely.
A majority of them. You're not going to land all 40 plus that are actually in the portal, and more might even be on the way. But 24, that's a win for Penn State. Getting the quarterback figured out, that's a win. Defensive line. Ooh, that's going to be a big one, especially with what Penn State has already lost in terms of guys in the NFL, former Penn State players that are already in the portal. They also need a superstar. Can they surprise and land somebody like a Jaden Woods from Florida? We're going to get to that and more coming up next here on this Locked On Crossover. And this episode is brought to you by Rougiet. Let's talk about something most men don't bring up, but absolutely should. Stress from work, from money, from life doesn't just switch off at night. And when it shows up at the worst possible time, Rougiet Ready is designed to help you take back control. Rougiet Ready is a next-generation prescription treatment created to support both the brain and the body so you can feel present, confident, and ready when the moment matters. Rougiet Ready combines 3 clinically proven ingredients in one mint that dissolves under your tongue so it absorbs fast. The science behind Rougiet Ready stands out. Those 3 clinically proven ingredients in one formula designed for both mental and physical readiness. You can connect with a board-certified doctor online, and everything ships discreetly to your door. It's easy to understand why over 150,000 men have already made the switch. If you've been thinking about taking the next step, now's the time. Head to Rougiet.com/LockedOnCollege. That is RUGIET.com/LockedOnCollege to get 15% off your order for a limited time. Rougiet Ready. Feel present, feel confident, feel ready. And once again, thank you so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions and the Portal your first listen or watch of today. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcasting network out there. If you haven't already, go check out our all-new Everydayer Club. You will get access to an ad-free audio feed for Locked On Nittany Lions and the Portal podcast, compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcasting app. You will also receive an invite to a members-only Locked On Everydayer Discord. That's right. Locked On Everydayer Club Discord server, which includes a group chat just for listeners of these shows. Go to LockedOnNittanyLions.supercast.com or tap the link in the show notes to learn more. Penn State needs defensive linemen. Penn State needs wide receivers just because both of those rooms are going to turn over going into next season. Brian, we have discussed it ad nauseum how defensive line, especially in the Big Ten, can make or break your team. And here's the thing with Penn State's plans. It's not just about getting mercenaries, guys that are going to be one and done, because Penn State doesn't need that. They need to build out for the next 2-3 years is pretty, that's because a lot of these guys that are in the portal only have 2 to 3 years of eligibility left for the most part. So that's where high school recruiting comes into play. Different conversation. You and I will have that plenty in due time. So for Penn State, it's about finding those players. I think that, and honestly, I'll tell you what the surprise might be. Retaining guys that, for the most part, I guess people outside of the Penn State bubble wouldn't expect you to retain. So let's start in-house at Happy Valley. I say, hey, Penn State needs to land a superstar that Matt Campbell isn't expected to retain. Do you know who those players are? They very may well not even enter the portal. I'm talking about Tony Rojas, Amari Campbell, Max Granville at defensive end, King Mack, Darius Dixon in the defensive backfield, Koby Howard at wide receiver. that's half the battle in this conversation, that not only do you need to go get a name like it, when I say Jaden Woods, I'm just giving an example. I'd like to throw Nick Marsh in this conversation because you need a superstar wide receiver. But part of that is not letting the star players that are already in the building even entertain the transfer portal.
Retention's probably more important, and you're seeing more of that. And it's one of the reasons you don't see DTs and OTs in the portal. Everybody knows how important the offensive linemen are, and the defensive linemen. They get paid a little extra. If you knew some of the numbers I was thrown today on a certain lineman, you'd fall over. But the point is still the same. If you can retain your guys, you've got some system, you've got some continuity there. So there's more value to your own guys, even if it's a better player somewhere else. Again, verbiage, knowing the system, knowing the place, knowing the school, all that stuff matters when it comes to the win-loss category. So hopefully for Penn State, at every position, there's a major guy, one of their top two players comes back, or at least like the first guy off the bench if it's a corner or whatever, so they can kind of plug and play them. And then you go out and you get the Iowa State kids and the other random players. I would imagine, though, that D-line is the question. Now, you and I were talking about D-line before we jumped into the show. There's quite a few pretty good defensive linemen in the portal. Jaden Wood, somebody they'll go after. He was committed to Penn State at one point.
A lot of defensive ends, not a lot of defensive tackles, though.
Yeah, D-tackle is just a wasteland for the most part. And it almost always is.
Because it's a premium. It's a premium position.
Yeah, it is. But ends are too, and it's just there's 5 times as many of them. It's just defensive tackle, man. There just aren't that many of them. It's even that way at the Under Armour All-American game. There's 5 DNs to every D tackle that I would want. It's just the way it is. So,
I mean, think about it. Finding somebody that's 280 plus pounds, that's explosive, that can take on double teams. It's easier to be 240, 250 pounds and rush after the quarterback or chase a guy over on the edge than it is to clog up the middle and be athletic doing it at around 300 pounds. Like, I understand it. I get it.
Yeah, they're just so few. Like Malik Blockton's in the portal. He's a kid from Auburn that I know. They've got him listed 5th on 24/7. I'd probably put him 1st or 2nd because I know what he looks like up close. But that, he's 5th D tackle, and he's played quite a bit his first 2 years, but based on his productivity as a D end, he might be number 10 or something. There's just so many of them. D tackle, he's top 5. That's how important it is. And for people that are curious, quality D tackle, that's 1.5 and up. Like 1.5 is like your base, like for one of the top guys. Low end.
Jeez.
So I'll just ask you this because I have no idea. Depending on what they think they can do this next season, do you think Penn State is willing to do that, or are they just going to take some Ivy League kids? Because otherwise you ain't getting D tackles. You're not going under 7 figures for a decent D tackle. It's not.
They're already looking at the JUCO route. They're already getting JUCO players to visit, or a JUCO player. So you say Ivy League, take that a step further. They're going the junior college route to at least for one option. Anybody. I've already said this on social media. I'll convey it in a show now. Penn State can use anybody and everybody at defensive tackle. It's just kind of the more the merrier at this point because it is a premium position. You need the depth there. You also have some reliable guys. Xavier Gilliam, he's in the portal. Could he return to Penn State? In theory, right? It's not a guarantee that everybody leaves just because they're in the portal. But Xavier Gilliam is somebody that you would want back. You would want to try to get Ty Blanding back. Owen Wafel, Anai White, all of those guys played snaps for Penn State. They're not terrible. Are they all superstars? No, but if you can get average to above average players just to at least build a foundation and then try to strike gold with a superstar player, then okay. But it is going to come at a hefty NIL price tag. And so defensive line, same thing could be said about wide receiver, but also, I mean, and Iowa State can't solve these problems. Iowa State can help build out the depth chart. There are some players that, okay, Carson Hansen at running back, you'll get some depth. A Chase Sowell at wide receiver, or Brett Eskelson. But those guys aren't superstars that take over the game. They complete your room and give you secondary and third options to help you, okay? When it comes to an instant impact, face of the room type of player, I mean, that's, I think, what Koby Howard can be at wide receiver. That's what I think Max Granville can be at defensive end. Honestly, Yvonne Kemaju for Penn State, second-year defensive end. But if we talk about wide receiver here, okay, so defensive line's important. Well, Rocco Becht and or Ethan Grunkemeyer, they're going to need players to throw to.
Yeah, I don't know where you go with the receiver thing. Tight end too. They've had some pretty good tight ends here recently at Penn State.
I don't think tight end's not going to be an issue. I'm worried about worried about wide receiver again.
They might have to take like 4 receivers, and that's my theory is you go get one dude, no matter what eligibility is left, and 3 guys that can play, maybe not dominant, but they got to get at least one guy. You're not going to get a Rocco to be happy to come there. Like nobody wants to throw to a bunch of number 2s. This past season at Iowa State, and it's nothing against Rocco, like his numbers went down. Well, why is that? The year before he had 2 wide receivers that both ended up, ironically, being drafted like the second round by the Texans.
Yep.
He had dudes. His stats went down like 500 yards. Who are you throwing to? It matters. So they need to get one guy. They don't have to go out and get 2 second-round picks. Be nice, but they need to get somebody. And it shouldn't be that hard to sell Penn State.
Yeah.
If you've got a veteran, come on, it shouldn't be that hard. And they're going to have to open the wallet, but they got to get somebody, or they're going to get into a lot of rock fights next year. You've got to have a few plays where we just have a better player than you, and he just scores from 50. That's something that Penn State has missed for a long time, and it's time for that to change.
Brian, ironically enough, though, you mentioned Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel, who were drafted by the Texans, who played at Iowa State. Jaden Higgins was a 2-star recruit out of high school and a 3-star portal prospect, and became a second-round pick, was the 34th overall selection. So we say, hey, ideally, you would love to get a Nick Marsh caliber player who's already established. But the next Jaden Higgins type of player might be right there in the portal for Penn State, and you won't know. But again, that's why Matt Campbell and the staff were brought in, for player development, for player evaluation, that you don't have to rely on, we got to try to get every 4-star possible and hope a few of them hit. Why? It's an uphill battle, but if you can find the guy that's willing to work, the 3-star that flies under the radar, hey, look, Kurt Cignetti in Indiana are doing it as we speak. That can be a formula if you're good at it.
I think Matt Campbell knows that game all too well, being at Iowa State. Not trying to pick on the Cyclones, but they're not getting 4-star kids very often. They get a couple of class maybe. So if he can get 1 or 2 of those at receiver portal-wise, in addition to what they got coming back and coming in with the recruiting class, maybe that works out. They might have to find a JUCO kid or something, but they might be a little more 12 personnel heavy this next year too, and that's fine. Iowa State did a lot of that with Rocco.
Yeah, they will. Oh, they will be. I'm into. We'll get into it more in the upcoming segment. Players that are already on the move. Iowa State, 40+ players are already in the portal. I'm anticipating that a lot of Iowa State players come over to Happy Valley, which is a good thing, but also Penn State has almost 20 former players now in the portal, 20 former Nittany Lions. We're going to discuss players that, what's the impact here of guys that could come over from Iowa State, guys that could leave Penn State, guys that still need to be retained. That is all coming up next here on this Locked On Crossover. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Fridays already feel different during basketball season, and FanDuel is making them even better. Every Friday night before the game tips off, FanDuel gives fans a new way to kick off the weekend with NBA Happy Hour is your official pregame. A limited time window where special offers drop right inside the FanDuel app before the action starts. Fridays from 6 to 7:30 Eastern have become appointment viewing with NBA Happy Hour. Opening the FanDuel app during Happy Hour always brings something new. Boosts, bonuses, surprises. It's easy to check the weekly special before tip-off and make a move before the window closes. The timing is perfect right before the games, right before the weekend starts. It adds extra energy to Friday night basketball without overthinking it. So before tip-off, check the FanDuel app and see what's dropping during NBA Happy Hour every Friday from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern. A little basketball, a little action, and a whole lot of Friday energy. That's NBA Happy Hour only on FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. The portal opens up today. It's a great start to 2026, right? Because we get to keep having these kinds of intense conversations and more just projections. No, we actually have tangible movement here now. We can analyze and project and everything else instead of just a guessing game and saying, okay, what's the depth chart going to look like? Well, after these moves, then we can do all of that fun stuff. But Penn State now has close to 20 players. And I imagine, Brian, after we finish recording, and January 2nd, January 3rd are in the books, there's going to be even more Penn State players. Iowa State, I mean, the roster's just ravaged at this point. All those guys are officially in the portal, but that's because, look, Matt Campbell is going to attract most of those guys over. But also, why isn't Penn State seeing this immediate exodus? I think there was the worry that the Nittany Lions were going to see dozens and dozens of players enter the portal. And I think that's more impressive on my account that Matt Campbell comes in. These guys aren't his players. There is, do I really want to stay on a team where a bunch of Iowa State players are going to come over and potentially compete with me and everything? And he's basically creating this middle ground where, at least for the time being, all things are setting up well so that Penn State can keep the best that Penn State has while adding most of the best that Iowa State has.
Finding that middle ground there that you're talking about is something I've thought about for a little while since we did a pod last week.
Mm-hmm.
You want to keep your culture at Penn State, but you are bringing Iowa State coaches and a head coach. You're going to need the players to assimilate to a certain degree, but it would be nice if several of those Iowa State guys came over to help with the structure, playbook, verbiage, and all that. How do you blend that? There's no blueprint here.
No.
I think every position is its own battle. Especially if you like, let's use DB. Those two corners, if they got both of them, sounds great. But it might tick off some of the other guys on the roster. Like, there's no perfect answer here. You're probably going to lose a few guys by bringing Iowa State guys in. You have to accept that going in. And I know no Penn State fan wants to hear that, but Penn State's not alone. Programs like Ohio State, USC, Texas, Georgia, it's the same thing. It's just there's more abundance this year with Penn State. It might be a little bit more widespread. So I'm curious to see how well they can do it. And we can read between the lines and we'll get some rumors from behind the scenes here. But when they bring in somebody, especially if it's an Iowa State kid that's pretty good, how many guys then hit the portal from Penn State?
Dozens of Iowa State players. If you're Penn State, you're trying to avoid that exodus overall. But again, for me, though, it's about retaining the quality of players. Again, I've already named them. You circle Koby Howard, Tony Rojas, and Amari Campbell, King Mack, special teams. Special teams can win and lose you games. Ryan Barker, who's one of the most accurate place kickers in all of college football. Do you really want to go around trying to find as clutch of a place kicker as him? No, you don't. So the natural attrition of losing some veteran guys that, okay, they would have been great for the depth chart. Maybe they contend for a starting spot here and there. Like, it is not ideal to lose Chaz Coleman, especially in the scheme of things when defensive line is such a priority. It is not ideal to also add on top of that Xavier Gilliam and Jalen Harvey. All three of those guys could have been starters, Brian, in 2026 for Penn State. Who knows? Maybe they come back around, right? That's the initial report that Xavier Gilliam could be a guy that circles back to Penn State. Maybe you could say the same thing about Jalen Harvey. I'll throw in a couple other names that it's just like, it's not ideal. Okay, Zariah Fisher. I thought Zariah Fisher was going to be out of eligibility, but he's on the move again, getting another medical clearance to play more college football. Keon Wiley, who was on the 2 deep at linebacker, somebody that could have increased his playing time. Gets kind of a fresh start with Danton Lynn. I don't know how he necessarily fit into Jim Knowles' defense all too well. That was kind of the struggle. It seemed like him and Jim Knowles weren't exactly on the same page because he had a really good up until the injury. So maybe that's where things change. But that's what I think of when I look at a player like Keon Wiley, that, he still has upside, just hasn't quite put it all together yet. But if that's the worst of this conversation, Brian, that it's just, okay, you lose a few starters with upside, you lose some quality backups, but you're going to get it on the back end with all the Iowa State players. I mean, Penn State couldn't ask to be in a better spot with the given situation.
It is ironic, and again, I'm probably going to sound like I'm picking on Iowa State, but Matt's a good coach, but he's coming from a program that's not going to have a lot of cachet. It doesn't have the cachet that Penn State does, for sure. If he was at a program that was like, let's say Matt came over from Texas, you're probably not going to get a ton of transfers. That's just reality.
Yeah.
Being at Iowa State, they don't get a ton of publicity. The NIL is certainly not what it would be at one of the Texas schools, all that oil money. It's a heck of a lot easier. So in some ways, especially short term, Penn State really benefits from it being Iowa State. And again, I'm not trying to pick on the Cyclones. I'm sure there'll be some Iowa State fans mad in the comments. That's not what this is about. It's just their NIL is just whatever. And it doesn't have a huge cachet. That program's in trouble for the next couple of years, probably. So Penn State will be the beneficiary.
Definitely. And I'm not going to rattle off all 40 plus. And again, new names from Iowa State continue to hop into the portal. But just to give people an idea, we've said this, you and I have said this on other crossovers. I've said this on other episodes, just players that if I'm Penn State, this is who I'm prioritizing. Obviously, Rocco Becht. I mentioned Carson Hansen at running back. Because there's so much uncertainty in the running back room, do you entertain the guy who was the backup to Carson Hansen in Abu Sama? You get a 1-2 punch right there at running back. Talked about Chase Sowell, Brett Eskelson, who could be your second or third options to complement a potential star caliber wide receiver, again, to fill out the depth chart at that spot. Ben Bramer. Hey, Penn State retained Andrew Rapplier, and they're going to run a ton of 12 personnel, maybe even 13 personnel, depending on what you have at tight end. Ben Bramer and Andrew Rapplier, hey, forget wide receiver for just a moment. You got to worry about not one, but potentially two superstar tight ends if they're able to land him, which I would naturally expect them to because Penn State might have an opening there.
He would be huge, especially for the red zone and the run game. That's a big dude, very experienced. Yeah, well, I mean, Bramer's in particular, like I just like his game. And I also think that being a versatile guy, if you're going to run 12, he can catch it. He can be your run blocker. He can put him at fullback,
everything,
do all kinds of things. That changes your formations, your game plan, and your opportunities in third down, fourth down, short yardage, goal line, red zone, whatever you want to say. The value goes beyond the statistics. I think that'll be one of Becht, kind of the obvious. But after that, you could argue that he's the most important one because he helps the offense in so many different ways.
And here's the thing, again, that I want to reiterate just briefly before we wrap up. Iowa State doesn't solve all your problems, okay? So it's not, defensive line's not going to be figured out. You're going to be able to get one or two when I say one or two impact players, you will be able to fill out a depth chart and fill out a roster, but there's not name after name after name. I see that with, you could potentially get two plug-and-play running backs, two plug-and-play at a minimum wide receivers, a plug-and-play tight end, a couple of plug-and-play offensive linemen. The offensive side of the ball seems pretty safe and secure from Penn State's perspective, one way or another. It's the defense, because if you don't retain Tony Rojas, if you don't retain Amari Campbell, if you lose more defensive linemen, that's where I'm going to be pushing the alarm, Brian, and our next conversation might not be as fun and interesting. It's not going to be as fun. Let me say, it'll still be interesting, but it's not going to be as fun if this does not go that way, if it does not go in the way that it needs to in basically the front half of the defense.
I've heard this in a lot of different ways, and while he's not exactly the most popular guy in college football right now, but Brian Kelly once said, you can scheme offense. Defense about recruiting. It's about players. You got to chase the ball. You don't know where it's going. You've got to have better athletes. Defense about recruiting, or in this case, portal. Yeah, I agree. It'll be the more important side overall, especially if Rocco comes. It won't be close. But at the same time, the D linemen are probably not really at Iowa State. They're going to have to go out and spend, and they're probably going to have to, quite frankly, overspend. I know Penn State fans won't like hearing this. They're not a national title contender next year, more than likely. So why would I go there when I could go to Bama or, fill in the blank? And it's a legit question. If you want this kid, you might have to pay an extra $300K. That'll probably tick a lot of people off, but you choose. There's a couple other schools, I won't go into it, that I've already been told. They know if we want them, we're probably going to have to pay more. welcome to college football in 2026.
Yes. A great start to the new year because we get to talk to Brian Smith from the Portal Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us on this crossover episode to start your new year. And if you are new to either of our shows, the Portal or Locked On Nittany Lions, subscribe to the YouTube channels and wherever you get your podcasts for more conversations with now the transfer portal officially opened up. Brian, you're going to be insanely busy to start the new year. And so am I with all of Penn State's player movement, for better or for worse. And I imagine definitely for the better. You're going to take your hits, but Penn State overall will be in a spot where they can be at a minimum competitive. And I'm talking 8-4, right? 9-3. That's kind of the expectation as a solid measure here. So Brian, I can't wait for our next conversation to analyze the moves that Penn State is actually able to pull off. Brian, thanks so much for the time. Appreciate it as always, and can't wait to connect once again.
Absolutely. It's going to be fun.